Hey y'all, how are my fellow nerds and non-nerds? I missed you guys so much. I am back in Texas. I've been in Colorado what seems like forever. I'm actually kind of bummed that I'm back because I kind of fell in love with Colorado, but I'm happy to be home. I missed my animals. I missed having cell phone service and able to talk to all of you guys. So I just missed you in general. Like, hugs all around, hugs all around. I am a Rebel podcast without an intro, so here it goes. You are listening to the Nerd in Texas podcast, the show that brings you useless information that could one day help you win trivia night. I'm literally a nerd in Texas, and I talk about TV shows, movies, video games, with a sprinkle of comedy. And I am your hostess, Chanel Fortney. I'm actually kind of rusty at this. It's been like a full week and a half. And if you hear kids screaming bloody murder, I promise you nothing is happening to them. They're playing something scary on the Oculus in the living room. And I can like hear them from my bedroom. I even have my desk and everything and my studio, like in air quotes, in my closet. And I can still hear them, but I'll try and talk over them. If you want to find me and my socials, you can click on the link to my Koji link page. Like and subscribe on any platform that you might be listening to. But I have something to ask of you. I have a favor to ask. My little podcast is up for 2 People's Choice Podcast Awards. I'm sorry, what? While I was in Colorado, I got an email that someone gifted me a nomination, because I guess you actually have to like pay to be in this awards thing, and so they gifted it to me. I am up for the Adam Curry Award, but all podcasts are up for that award. I don't know exactly what it is, but if you could vote for me in that category. And I am in the TV and film category, so if you could vote for me there as well. If you could vote for a fellow podcaster, podcast, because there are actually a few people in this podcast. It's Mass Debater in the comedy category. It would be a huge favor. It would be awesome. I was given a nomination, so I have no idea what I'm doing, but your votes would be awesome. And remember, vote for Mass Debater in the comedy category. It would be a huge help. We're kind of helping each other out because, like I said, I've never done this before. And I think they have, but I'm not sure. So in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about episodes 2 through 3 of Loki. And I will be talking about episode 4. So episode 5 was actually released today. I have not watched it yet, so I won't be talking about it. I won't necessarily be giving out spoilers of episode 4, but I'll be talking about something that happens in the episode. So if you haven't seen episode 4 and you don't want it entirely spoiled, you can get out of this and listen to it later, or you can listen to it and be like, oh, okay, so that's what she was talking about. So it's not necessarily anything that's a spoiler or happens at the end. It's something that kind of happens in the episode. And I'm sorry for my scratchy voice. I swear, this was not like my voice and everything. I was fine in Colorado. The moment I get into Texas, it was like, attack her. She hasn't had allergies in a week and a half. So they're like making up for not being here. So what is this podcast about today? I will be talking about the Norse mythology story behind Loki cutting Sif's hair. Now, if you want to know my background in Norse mythology, because if you're on Facebook or if you're on Twitter, everyone's a Norse mythology expert because they Googled it. So I want to make sure that you know that I kind of know what I'm talking about. So what happened was I did the ancestry DNA thing, and I discovered that I originated from Scandinavia. And I have a family member that is like a family historian, and he discovered that we are descendants from Vikings. So ever since then, I have done my research on Vikings and Norse mythology. The story that I'm going to be telling y'all today, I got it from a book by Neil Gaiman. I will leave the link for you to check it out on Amazon if you would like to read it. It's a really good read. It's a short book, It's kind of just trims all the fat of all the Norse mythology and kind of gets you straight to the point and straight to who is who, what is what, how this happened. I love the book personally, and I'm reading it for like the second time. It is called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. It's a #1 New York Times bestseller, so I knew it was going to be good. I knew it was going to be awesome. And what's funny is, like I said, I'm reading it for the second time. I just kind of grabbed it and decided to read it on my flight to Colorado. And so I went over this story again, and then I watched the fourth episode of Loki and was like, oh my gosh, that is so crazy how this like happened, because I just read the story and then now it's happening in Loki 4, like episode 4. So it's pretty funny. But anyways, check that out in the link in the description. The link to vote for my podcast will be there as well. And it'll all be on my Koji page as well. So anyways, let's get back on track. In episode 4, Mobius and the TVA capture Loki and Sylvie. Mobius wants Loki to talk about certain things that happened in the show. I'm not going to tell you. So they throw him in a prison room, and he kind of figures out a way to torture Loki into talking. The room that they throw Loki in is actually a room he discovers is somewhere on Asgard. And then Sif walks in and is like, there you are, Loki, you're so pathetic, and like just kind of going off on him. And then slaps him across the face and is like, why did you do it? And she has a fist full of hair. She then tells him that, like I said, you're pathetic, you'll always be alone. She kind of beats the crap out of him and then walks out. And then 2 minutes later, she does it all over again and again and again. And you realize that Loki has been put in a time loop of when he cut Sif's hair. And at what point she asks, why did you do it? And he was like, because I thought it would be funny. And then he kind of confessed, you know what, I thought it would be funny, but now I realize that it's not funny, and I'm sorry. And you actually feel sorry for Loki for a moment. And she, helps him up, and then she walks out. And then 2 minutes later, she does it again. And what a lot of people don't know is that there's actually more to the story. And it's actually how Thor and the gods got one of its major weapons that protect Asgard. So stick around for the end to find out the plot twist to this story, and you're going to be like, what? OMG? Now, for the Norse mythology version of that story, what a lot of people don't know is that the connections in the Marvel Norse mythology, I guess you could call it, the Norse Marvel, they're different. I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm just going to say they're different. But Loki is actually Odin's blood brother. So keep that in mind. But this, as I read this story. But this story is about Sif and how this led to Thor getting one of his most valuable treasures. So Sif was actually a beautiful, blue-eyed, golden blonde woman. She was known amongst the gods and the Asgardians for her blonde hair. She was also married to Thor. So one morning, Thor wakes up, and when he wakes up Sif and says, your hair, what happened? You are bald. And she freaks out. And Thor immediately gets mad and immediately thinks of Loki. And Sif is like, why do you think Loki did it? And he tells her, anytime something goes wrong, I immediately think of Loki. It saves a lot of time. And I thought that part of the story was pretty funny. So he goes and finds Loki, and he tells Loki, you did this to Sif. And at first Loki denies it. And then Thor grabs him by the neck, and he finally admits it. He's like, yes, I did it, and explains he did it because he was drunk and he thought it was funny. So Loki, being Loki, did what he did. Thor demands that Loki gives her hair back, but because he ripped it out by the root, It'll never grow back. She's going to be bald for the rest of her life. And believe it or not, the gods and Vikings did not take a spouse cheating on the other lightly. Now, I know, like Norse gods and Vikings, if they were married and the wife allowed it, or if the husband allowed it, it was okay for them to sleep around with other people. But cheating without the other spouse knowing about it, they did not take it lightly. So Thor tells him, what do you think everyone's going to think of her? They are going to think that she was unfaithful and that her hair was her glory. And they're going to think that was done to her as some kind of punishment for something she did wrong. Because that was kind of things that they did to, women who cheated on their husbands. They made a mark so everyone else would know that this is what she did. And just like other way around, women who caught their husbands cheating, Vikings were pretty much the only, I forget what it's called, civilization, if you want to call it that allowed women to divorce their husbands. They had to explain why, and the rest of the people had to agree with it. And then when they did get divorced, the women were allowed pretty much everything. I mean, that's if the tribe or the civilization or wherever they were allowed it. So he tells Loki she's not going to go to the rest of her life bald. You will get her hair, and if you don't, I will come back every day and break every bone in your body. And at first, it'll take me hours, but by the end of the first week, it'll take me 15 minutes. And Loki's like, nah, I won't. And Thor breaks his arm, and he's immediately like, okay. Dwarves can make her hair. They can make her gold hair that can bond to her scalp and grow like it was normal hair. So Thor's like, all right, well, it looks like you're going to be talking to the dwarves. So Loki went to the underground forge, and he decided to go to some of the greatest dwarves of all of them, named the Sons of Ivaldi. He tells them that he asked around, and people tell him that the brothers Brock and Eitri are the best dwarves to forge treasures for the gods. And they tell Loki, that's BS. We are the best dwarves for the job. So Loki says, all right, well, let's have a challenge. Let's challenge Brock and Eitri to a contest of the gods, and the gods will be the judges. You will make 3 treasures for the gods, and that the gods will judge who the best dwarves are, but one of those items has to be blonde hair. So the Ivaldi brothers agree to this challenge. They're like, they're full of crap. We are the best ones. I agree to this challenge. So now Loki goes to the dwarves Brock and Eitri and tells them that the Ivaldi brothers say, you are the weakest dwarves to create treasures for the gods, and tells them of the challenge. And Brock tells Loki, this sounds like one of your tricks to me. It seems like you are creating trouble between us dwarves and between us and the Ivaldi brothers. And Loki assures him, no, it's not. And Brock agrees to this challenge under one condition, that if they win, they get Loki's head. But because it would make a great treasure, using his trickster brain or a trickster type of weapon or treasure, and Loki agrees. But he knew the Ivaldi brothers were making golden blonde hair for Sif, and so there was no way Brock and Eitri would win amongst the gods. Now, he knew the Ivaldi brothers would win, but he wanted to make sure that Brock and Eitri lost. So to make sure that they lost, he would do whatever he could to sabotage them, creating the treasures for the gods. Sorry. Loki did what Loki does and turned into a fly, because he's a shapeshifter. And he turned into a big horsefly. And I don't know if you have ever seen a horsefly, but they are huge and they bite. I'm here in Texas. I used to have horses. I used to have cows. And I don't even have horses and cows anymore. My neighbors do. But I still have horse flies that show up at my house, and it's really annoying sometimes. So Eitri makes his treasures for the gods outside and tells Brock, when I say you pump into the gallows, you don't stop until I tell you to stop. The temp needs to be consistent, and it needs to be perfect, and it needs to stay perfect until I tell you to stop. So Eitri gets some pigskin and places it on the forge. For he has been wanting to make this thing with this pigskin for a long time, and he figures this is the perfect time to do it. He goes outside and tells Brock to start pumping. So he does. Eitri starts pumping. Loki, being a giant horsefly, lands on the back of Brock's head. Brock is the one forging them. Eitri is the one pumping into the gallows. If you're not sure what that is, it's like this weird, funky thing, like xylophone looking thing, and it pumps air into a fire so they can forge their weapons. But Loki, being a giant horsefly, lands on the back of Brock's head and starts walking all around the back of his head. And Brock does not stop pumping, not even to swat the fly away. He just keeps pumping until Eitri tells him to stop. So Eitri tells him to stop. Eitri walks in and takes his work from the forge, and it is a boar with bristles of gleaming gold. Eitri tells Brock, good work. A fraction hotter or colder, it would have been for nothing. It would have been ruined. So they get to work on the second piece, and Eitri tells him the same thing for the second piece. I need you pumping the gallows. Do not stop until I tell you. This is very important for this piece. So same thing. Eitri grabs a chunk of gold this time and places it in the forge. He goes outside. Brock starts pumping. Loki, the housefly, this time starts biting the back of Brock's neck. But Brock does not stop. He keeps pumping, and Loki is causing all of this pain in his neck. He does not swat at it. Eitri then tells him to stop. He walks inside. He places a golden arm band into the cooling pool, and by the time it cools off, he tells Brock, he calls it Dropner. Sorry, I couldn't say that very well. It's either Dropney or Dropner. I'm not sure. I can never pronounce these words. And Eitri says, the Dripper? That's a weird name for an armband. And Brock lets him know, well, this isn't an ordinary armband. It is a special armband. Hey nerds, you know I love helping you out. So I'm giving you a little tidbit on if you were wanting to start a podcast, I highly suggest you start it with Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. And let me explain. 1, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So they get to work on the third piece. This piece is extra special, and it's extra critical that he keeps the temp consistent in order for it to be perfect. This one needs to be handled with more care and than the first and the second one. So Eitri grabbed a piece of pig iron, the biggest piece that Loki has ever seen before, and Loki knew that this was going to be a good treasure, that this one's going to be a good one, and that he really needs to sabotage this one so they, won't impress the gods and they won't win. Eitri goes outside. Brock starts pumping, but this time Loki lands in between the dwarves' eyes. And as he starts pumping, he starts biting Brock's eyelids. But Brock keeps pumping with blood just running down his eyes and his face. He does nothing but feel pain in his face. But he keeps pumping. And Loki moves on to his other eyelid and starts biting his other eyelid. And that is when Eitri decides to swat at Loki, but he did it with such speed and force that Loki barely escaped with his life. Now, Eitri comes inside with his piece and is disappointed. He's disappointed in his piece. He's disappointed in Brock. He says the piece is deformed, not disformed. Is that the same thing? Deformed, disformed? I think it's the same thing. But anyways, he's like, I hope it won't bother the gods. It still works. It still has its power. So let's see what happens. So they have all 3 of their pieces. And Loki just magically shows up. And Eitri tells him, I don't want you presenting my work. So Brock is going to go with you to Asgard. And he's going to present them to the gods. So everyone is there in front of the panel of gods. And Loki explains to them all that the dwarves have prepared gifts and treasures, and the gods will have to judge who the better treasure maker is. And there are the 3 gods on the panel, which is Odin, Thor, and Freya. So Loki presents the gifts to the gods, starting with the sons of Ivaldi. And their first piece for Odin was a spear that could penetrate anything and will always hit its mark. The second was the flowing golden hair forged from actual gold and will attach itself to the head of any person who needs it. And it will grow and behave like real hair. So Thor's like, okay, let's test it. And Sif came forward with her head covered. She uncovers her head and everyone gasps. They all freak out. Thor placed the golden hair on Sif, and it took to her head, and she walked out and showed all of her friends her new hair. So, the third treasure or item was a small folded cloth, and this was for Freya. At first, she is not impressed, for it looks like a basic scarf, but Loki tells her if you unfold it, it turns into a ship. The ship will always have fair wind wherever it goes, and even though it will be the biggest ship in your fleet, you can fold it back into the cloth when you're finished. So Freya is impressed and can't wait to use it. Now Brock comes forward. His eyes are swollen from Loki and gives Odin the golden armband. He tells Odin this armband is called Draupnir, or the Dripper, and every 9th night, it will drop 9 golden rings just like it. Now, Vikings and Odin and Norse gods did everything in 9s. Odin hung from the tree for 9 nights, and that's when, that's a whole other, Norse mythology story that I'll get into later. But anyways, they do everything in 9s. So every 9th night, it will drop, and 9 golden rings just like it will fall. If you give them as you can give them as rewards or store them for treasure, and your wealth will increase. He then gave Freya the boar with golden bristles and tells her, the boar was made by my brother to pull your chariot. It will race across the sky and over the sea. It's faster than your fastest horse. There will never be a night too dark, for its golden bristles will light the darkest night so you can see where you're going. And she was impressed, but still not as impressed as the folded cloth that turns into a ship. So Loki knew his head was safe, for he already knew he sabotaged the last gift. From beneath the cloth, Brock placed a hammer in front of Thor. Thor looked at it at first and laughed, and he said, the handle is rather short. And Brock nodded and said, yes, that was my fault, for I was working in the bellows. And he gave Loki this glare because he knew Loki was behind his eyes being bit and his eyes being swollen, and behind him accidentally messing up this gift. So Brock told Thor, but do not dismiss it, for it is called Mjolnir. I always mess up Thor's hammer's name, so just Thor's hammer. It's a lightning maker. It is unbreakable, and Thor immediately was intrigued because he's like, I have broken many weapons. When you throw it, it will always come back. And he's like, that's even better because every time I throw something at someone or at something, it just keeps going. It never comes back. And I have lost many hammers or many weapons because of it. When you throw it, you will never miss what you are throwing it at. Thor was even more intrigued, and he's just super excited. Then he tells Thor, you can also change the size of the hammer. It will grow or it'll shrink, and you can just place it in your pocket. Thor started clapping and was so pleased that he told him that this is the finest gift anyone has ever given me. This weapon will help protect Asgard and assist me in many battles. Odin and Freya were pleased, and this meant that Brock and Eitri won the challenge. Now, Brock was ready for Loki's head, for it would make a fine treasure. Loki says, okay, wait, I will ransom my head, and I will give you my treasures. And Brock is like, dude, we make treasures. I have plenty of those. So Loki said, okay, you can have my head if you can catch me. And so Brock looked over at Thor and was like, can you catch him? And Thor was like, loving this. And he's like, heck yeah, I'll go catch him. So Thor gets him, and Brock took out his knife and was ready to cut off his head. But Loki was like, wait, you can cut off my head, but you can't cut off my neck. For our agreement was my head only. And Odin said, well, Loki is right. You cannot cut off his neck. And Brock was like, what? How the hell am I going to cut off his head if I can't cut off his neck? So then Brock made a suggestion to Odin, and Odin agreed. So Brock took a strip of leather and wrapped it around Loki's mouth, and then went to pierce the leather with his knife, but it didn't work. Loki placed a protection spell against knife blades in case his other ploys didn't work. So Brock had another idea. I keep calling him Brock because I want to call him Brokey, and Loki and Brock. So Brock had another idea, and Odin agreed, for he thought it would be funny. Brock took a pointed spike and pierced holes along Loki's mouth and sewed his mouth shut. Thor laughed and agreed with Odin. At least it'll be quiet for a while. Brock walked away with Loki's mouth sewn shut and not able to complain, and it was more painful for Loki, not able to talk. And so that's how it happened. That's how Thor got his hammer. That's how the gods got some of their greatest treasures. Even Thor's hammer was Loki's doing. I mean, I know with Marvel it was Odin giving him the hammer, but this, like I said, Marvel mythology and Norse mythology are different. Connections are different, but I mean, Loki, I feel like Marvel does that to have things make more sense. Because even though Loki is Odin's brother, he's the same age as Thor. And so, one, that kind of made more sense. And they kind of had this back and forth brother relationship. So that kind of made more sense for Marvel to go at it with that direction. And yeah, so the main point of this story, and it says it at the end of the chapter, is that you resent Loki even when you're grateful for him, and then when you're grateful for him, you hate him. So that's the importance of Loki and being the god of mischief. But thank you for joining me on this episode of the Nerd in Texas podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my story. I had some hiccups and some problems along the way of making this podcast, and I hope it's okay. I hope it comes out all right. Make sure you visit my website, nerdintexas.com, or you can subscribe to the show. Find me on all my platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, so you'll never miss a show. And make sure to vote for my podcast and Masturbators podcast as well for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. And I'll see what happens. If you like to send me a tip, I have my Ko-fi page. You can send me a tip and you get an invite to my Discord server. Another cool thing is Fortnite came out. If you were part of the Fortnite crew, you got the Loki skin. I know a lot of people are complaining about it because it has the full-on Loki horns, and the Loki horns are really tall, and you can see him from far away or something like that. But it's a really cool skin to have. So if you're part of the Fortnite crew, check it out. I'm sure you've already got it on July 1st. Use my code NERDNTX in the item shop to help support a creator and help support me, I guess. And until then, peace out, nerds. I love you guys. I miss you guys. Hit me up on Twitter. Bye.